Hey, good looking. Want to go out with me tonight? I promise I won't bring you home. Ever. This is Darkness Prevails, the best place to share your creepy true stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. You liked those stories about crazy exes. Well, can you handle these dates gone horribly, horribly wrong? You thought dating was stressful enough. Now let's see what happens when dates are turned into straight-up horror films. Enjoy these allegedly true scary dating stories. First, I really want to read your Valentine's Day stories next for the final Valentine's Day video, so be sure to send those to me with the links in the description. And hey, think about checking out some of my merch at morbidmonsters.com. It would make a good Valentine's Day gift, I guess? Anyway, real quick, here are my favorite early comments from my previous video. Black Mage Zero says, "No crazy ex stories for us lonely people." That's just great. Now I'm gonna be all sad when I read these stories. Monkey D Chalk says, "You beautiful little man. You had 2 chances in that sentence to describe me correctly and you got both of them wrong. I'll let you try again next time, monkey." Blue Tag Schoberg says, "You can't be afraid of this one if nobody wants to date you." Well, if no one wants to do the job themselves, I guess I'll have to date you and become your crazy ex. Anyway, Andrew Cornell says, "Are you going to do videos on all the holidays?" I'll try to if I can, there's just too many of them. And TKD Jaden says, "X marks the spot." Who is Mark? Someone I should know about? There's no time to be jealous, because here are those 5 dating horror stories. Number 1. Romantic Date at the Cabin in the Woods. Submitted by ABBROMASKI. I'd been seeing this girl for a short time, around 3 months altogether. I decided it wouldn't hurt anything to take her on an adventure to my grandfather's cabin in the Smoky Mountains, just across the North Carolina border into Tennessee. I grew up in the Midwest myself on a large hog and horse farm. She, on the other hand, had never been out of the city. Personally, I was used to being in the woods, hunting, trapping, and hiking. Her monthly trips to the farmer's market at the state fairgrounds on Saturdays, until now that's what she considered a weekend country trip. I didn't mind that about her though. I saw it as an opportunity that I would be able to show her things she'd never seen before. I figured it was about time to introduce this woman to a little refinement in life by joining her for a weekend at the cabin. She readily agreed as if it was a space adventure. Enthusiastically, all I had to do was point out the trail and she led the way up to the mountain to the cabin. On the hike there, we even saw a mother bear in the distance with 2 cub bears. We stopped to take a few photos. I urged her to keep moving so we could make it to the cabin before dark. I was beginning to wonder if we would ever make it. Seemed every time she saw a bird or a deer or even an odd-looking plant, she had to stop for a while and take like a gazillion photos. Finally, we made it, and lucky for me, which one of my relatives had visited the cabin last, had left plenty of cordwood cut and stacked for the next visitor. As we made our way into the cabin, she was astounded at the simple things we had inside. A sofa, beds, full kitchen. It was odd for her to see a fully functioning house, basically, out in the wilderness. All the amenities she was used to in the city. There was no phone line or electricity available in this remote region, but 100 feet away from the cabin, there was a utility building that housed our generator and water pump. So inside the cabin, we had everything we'd need, and this was a comfort to her. But there was no cable TV or satellite TV or internet. Luckily for her, I brought my laptop, and I had pre-downloaded some scary movies and stories. Now, before we go further, I do need to say that we were in that point in the relationship where she had a pet name for me that was something ridiculous, like Snookums or Baby or something else that you hope no one else heard, but was still sort of endearing. The thing is with this relationship, though, was that she never changed my pet name. Anyway, we cooked outside on a campfire because she had mentioned she never did that before, and was really looking forward to it. After a great conversation while cooking, we went inside to eat because it was already getting dark, and I'm pretty sure I had swatted more than 30 June bugs away while cooking, and by the end of it I was only confident that a few had gotten into the chili bowl. I'd really outdone myself this time. Everything was perfect, and I was obviously the master of my domain. Every time she heard a noise outside, she would consult me as to the origins of it. Maybe a deer walking around, or an owl nesting in a nearby tree, wind blowing. It could be a whole host of things, and even though I really was just guessing or giving bullcrap explanations off the top of my head, she took everything as a serious and complete answer. She trusted me. After dinner and a little light conversation, we decided to listen to some scary stories I had on the laptop. Seemed like hours went by, but I didn't mind. Here I had this beautiful woman sitting beside me, all snuggled up, and at times trembling, with me as her security blanket. So up until now, this story has been pretty boring, I'd say. But what I'm about to tell you next, I swear is the truth, and as unbelievable as this story may seem at times, you have to listen to it till the end, because you never know someone as good as you think you do, and this is why I sleep with one eyeball practically taped open. She had never heard the stories, nor me to be a fan of horror stories. Still, she was very intent on hearing them. Although I had heard many of them before, I selected them for the shock value. My plan was working perfectly. You couldn't have poured water between us. She was so pressed up against me at times. After about 3 hours of listening to these stories, I was getting sleepy. Although she was wide awake, I felt I could get away with a quick cat nap, so I would be revitalized when the real bedtime stories begin. From sound sleep, I was abruptly awakened by a violent shaking at the front door. I sat up and watched as the door shuddered and looked as if it would pop out of its frame at any moment. She too was awake and almost climbing over the top of me or behind me to hide. This was not part of my plan, nor had I ever had this happen to me. I had not experienced anything like this before. The lights were flickering. The cabin, although sturdy and built from real logs, had me concerned it would fall in on us. Suddenly, the door flung open so hard it bounced against the wall. Then it began to swing back, leaving enough room for me to see outside. An eerie, solid blackness. We slowly turned to look at one another, either of us having said not a word. But when our eyes made contact, I could see a deep fear in her. As a matter of fact, she pushed back away from me and stood up, never breaking eye contact with me. Slowly, she backed away from me and towards the door, walking backwards, never looking away from me. What was going on? I didn't understand any of this. Did she think I was the force at hand and that I was trying to scare her? How could it have been me? I'd been sleeping. She walked away, all the way out the door of the cabin, and pulled it closed behind her as she left. It seemed like I sat there for 5 minutes, but I know it was only a couple of seconds before I heard her scream as though something outside had grabbed her. I sprang up and ran to the door, but not before grabbing Grandpa's old shotgun from above the fireplace mantel. I opened the door with no concern for my own safety. What I saw out there, I remember to this day, beyond every detail. There, at the bottom of the porch, stood a creature that was looking me straight in the eyes. There were 4 steps to get to the ground, at an average of 8 inches per step, plus the rise from the ground to the first step. The creature was at eye level with me still. I'm 6'2", and that means this thing was a minimum of 8.5 feet tall. It was covered in black and brown streaked long hair from head to toe. He, or it, or she, or whatever, it looked at me with bright yellow eyes, with horizontal slits across the pupils of its eyes. It had a long snout and a nose like a dog, But my fear soon turned to rage when I noticed the thing had in its arms my girlfriend, fighting through the horror of what I was seeing. I fired off the shotgun, not at the two of them, but in the air to at least scare the thing away. And luckily, it did the trick. It let go of her first, then ran back into the woods. I grabbed her, and together we ran to my truck, and we hightailed it out of there, not even bothering to lock up the cabin. I didn't care about the cabin. I wasn't going to stay there any longer, and I wasn't coming back in the future. Whatever it was, it's still out there, and I've been wanting to ask my family members who have stayed in that cabin if they'd seen something similar to it. Beware of cabins in the woods. If you plan on taking the people you care about into a cabin getaway, they might just be in real danger. Number 2. Creepy Night at the Hot Springs, submitted by TALLBLIZZARDWALKS. This happened only a few months ago, and I still can't make any sense of it. My girlfriend and I were on a trip through some national forest land in Idaho. This place is familiar to us as we worked in the area and spent many summer days exploring the lakes, rivers, and forests in the region. Some of the best features in the area are the groups of natural geothermal springs that bubble up from the ground in big, deep pools at perfect hot tub temperatures. We decided to visit these hot springs on a moonlit night. We've been there dozens of times before, but never at night, as technically the place is a recreation site that closes after dark. The local game warden was known to bust people camping there, but as it was the weekend, the other springs in the area that were open at night were packed with people, so we decided to risk sneaking in after dark just to have the place to ourselves. The first of many disconcerting things that night was the cross. At the trailhead, we saw a wooden cross made of sticks and twine erected on a pile of dirt. There were scraps of black plastic, like from a garbage bag, in the dirt, and it really looked like something was buried there. We joked about how creepy it was, but decided to ignore it and head down the trail anyway. The moon was out, and we walked without flashlights deep into the woods. The night was quiet and peaceful, and with great joy we arrived at the pools and began to strip for a good soak. As we enjoyed the steaming pool, we were feeling romantic and amorous. We did the deed right there in the water, and shortly after, we heard an ear-splitting boom. The noise was so loud that it hurt our eardrums and our heads were left ringing. It was a loud, unfamiliar noise that sounded like an explosion or a car crash. It seemed to surround us, yet it was far away at the same time. I thought it sounded like a giant metal door slamming open, or a grenade going off somewhere nearby. My girlfriend yelped and grabbed me, hissing, "What was that?" All I could muster was, "I don't know. It sounds like a car crashed on the road." But inside, I knew there was no way. It was a 3-mile hike off the highway, along a noisy creek. Then I simply said, "Let's get our clothes on. We're leaving this place." We noped right out of there, and I did my best to stay calm even though I was terrified. We tried not to run and to be careful of the darkness around us. When we returned to the trailhead, I noticed our truck was no longer the only vehicle in the parking lot. A black truck was parked right next to us, and I assumed it was the warden, waiting to bust us for being there at night. As we got closer, I saw the truck had Montana plates, and it couldn't have been the warden. There were 2 large men standing there, staring us down, and they didn't look friendly. One man locked eyes with me, so I said in my deepest, manliest voice, "Good evening," to which he replied in a thick Eastern European accent, "Are you the only ones?" I said yes, and we literally broke into a run to our own vehicle and left. The drive back, my mind raced with questions. What was that noise? Why did it happen the moment we stopped? Almost like a reply to us doing the deed. Why didn't whatever it was make an appearance or continue making noise? And why were those creepy Russian dudes there? I couldn't explain it to myself, let alone my still shaking girlfriend, and I didn't get much sleep. I have some possible scenarios. A crash on the highway, perhaps. Something big and loud enough to reach us all the way out there. Someone shooting, but it was dark. It was hunting season and the noise was long, not the sudden pop of a firearm. Or maybe dynamite. The Forest Service occasionally uses dynamite to clear boulders off the trail. But again, why would they be doing this in the middle of the night? And perhaps it was a sonic boom. It would explain the noise coming from everywhere, but it wouldn't explain why those men were waiting there by our vehicle. One thing's for sure, I don't want to hear that sound again. I was frightened enough that night. I don't want to feel that scared ever again. Number 3. Our paranormal date last year. Submitted by Anonymous. This all happened when my girlfriend and I began dating last year, specifically on Valentine's Day. As we both are specialists in the paranormal, that's actually why we dated in the first place. We wanted to do something fitting and interesting together. I won't give out our names or say where we live exactly, but I'll say that we both live in Florida, and that last year we wanted to see the legendary skunk ape that lives in the Everglades National Park. As it was easier, we took a bus to get there, and we went during the day. That evening we arrived at the campsite, and we were excited, at the same time a bit nervous, because if anything like this did exist, there was a chance it could be violent, or at the very least unpredictable. So if we really did see anything this time, we were definitely going to keep our distance. That night, after setting up a campsite, we scoured the woods for about 3 hours. The darker it got into the night, the more we relied on smell and sound. As the typical sightings go, they say the skunk ape has a very rancid odor about it. Believe me when I say this, I thought I'd be excited to smell something or hear something that would tell us the skunk ape was nearby. But when it all comes down to it, you're never as prepared as you think you are in real life. You see, when we started to head back for camp, to call it a night, we smelled it. The odor I had only heard of, it was far worse than I'd imagined. Like a group of skunks had crossed the road but had become roadkill. It was bad, and I found myself gagging, and when I smelled it, I was afraid. You know, even as a paranormal enthusiast, you go out hunting for things, but you never really expect to run into it. You never really expect to come face to face with what you're looking for. That might not be how it goes for you, but that's how I felt at the time. So when I knew that we weren't alone out there, from the terrible smell and the sounds of tree stalks breaking, I was horrified, not ready for any of this. We began to walk faster back to the campsite, hoping to just pack up and catch the last bus for the night. But as the sounds drew closer, we got desperate, and we jumped in some bushes, thick bushes, and covered ourselves inside, hoping that whatever it was didn't see us, and it would just leave us alone. That's when we finally saw it, the thing that had turned our date expedition into a nightmare. It was covered in hair, long hairs, reminiscent of the branches of willow trees, but it was all dirty and brown and covered in mud. The smell got more powerful too, as if it couldn't get any worse. It began to make us gag. It took everything I had to keep myself from vomiting. The creature itself looked to be around 1/4 of a ton. It walked like a chimpanzee, but it was tall. Even though it walked like that, hunched down onto its knuckles, it was still at least 6 feet tall from head to toe. If it stood up, it would easily have been 9 feet tall. It made these huffing and grunting sounds as it seemed to be smelling our campsite. It didn't seem to be happy we were there. Perhaps we were trespassing. Maybe this was its territory. We hid in the bushes for about 15 minutes, and the skunk ape thing just stayed there, exploring our campsite, and we knew what we had to do. We made a run for it, running towards the road at our highest possible speed. Luckily, it may have seen us, but I don't think it cared for pursuing us. I didn't hear anything more of it, and I haven't seen it again. That was the time our paranormal date had turned into a run-in with a nightmare creature. Something that could have snapped us like twigs, I'm sure. I'm glad we made it out alive, and now we have a story like this to share with people whenever we want to remind them that there are things out there, things that will remind you that wild animals can still put you in your place. That girl and I are still together to this day, and I hope we can have more paranormal or supernatural adventures in the future. Number 4. Creepy Valentine's Day Story, submitted by Eric R. It was Valentine's Day, and my girlfriend and I had been together for almost a year. I was planning on doing something special for her. Samantha was her name. I wanted to make it a great evening for the two of us. Anyway, that day I called her. The first time I called her that day, but she didn't answer. This was odd because on previous days, Samantha always answered my phone calls. Of course, I thought maybe she was busy. So later that day, I tried again. To my surprise, she still didn't answer. I was beginning to get worried, so I called her mother, and she said that Samantha wasn't home. I asked her if she knew where she might be, and she said I honestly thought she was with you already. I said, okay, and hung up. Once more I tried to call Samantha. Finally, she did pick up, but there was nothing. On the other line was just someone breathing. I figured maybe she accidentally dialed me, but then I received a text message from her number, asking me to meet her at the park in 20 minutes. It was around 8:30 p.m., and it was dark by then. I texted back and told her to meet later at our spot, which was at the park, and I was happy that our date was actually going to be on. Valentine's Day was almost over, but we still had time to make something of it. She agreed, and I was soon getting ready for our meetup. It was about 9 p.m. when I got there. I had texted Samantha, and she said she was there as well. I told her it'd take me another 5 minutes to finish walking to the spot. A few minutes later, I had arrived, and I texted her because she wasn't there like she said she was. I was growing worried and a bit frustrated. Was she trying to lie to me or set me up for some reason? And what was weirder was that when I did arrive, I never saw her car, but because she kept telling me that she was there, I ignored that part. Maybe she got a ride with a friend. I don't know. I was now completely suspicious and expecting the worst. I was filled with relief when I saw a feminine figure in the distance. My bad, I thought. Maybe I just couldn't see her at first. She was actually there waiting on me, and I had just gotten worried over nothing. I smiled and began to approach her at our spot. She was facing away from me, maybe staring down at her phone or something, I don't know. But as I got closer, I heard her laugh, and then she ran straight into the woods nearby that was no longer part of the park. She ran until I couldn't see her, and completely ignored me when I called her name. What the heck, I said. What was going on? Did she want me to follow her out there? Before I decided to follow her into the woods to see what was going on, I received a text from her mother. Samantha's home now if you want to call, it said. I read the rest of the message in horror. She lost her phone today. Thinks someone may have stolen it. What? Someone took her phone and lured me out here. And now, were they trying to lure me into the woods alone? I didn't take another step towards those woods. I immediately turned around and went home, but not before hearing another sinister laugh from among the trees. And number 5, My Catfish Date by Jordan J. Always know who you're dealing with, who you're talking to. And always remember, there is a wall of anonymity on the internet. Never trust anyone you've just met. With that out of the way, let me tell you my story. Let it serve as a cautionary tale of what could happen if you're too innocent online. I was 16, an awkward guy, and I was insanely desperate to find someone who cared about me, who would find me attractive. I'm not afraid to admit it, and just like our female counterparts, men desire to be desired. We desire to feel attractive and beautiful much the same way. All these male stereotypes can really mess with a guy's confidence, with his happiness. It was back then that I met someone through Facebook. Her name was Linda. Her profile pictures were breathtaking. She had the sort of beauty that, no matter the angle, she looked amazing. She was 15, a year younger than me, and she only lived a county away. It was close enough we could meet on weekends if we ever got serious. When I was that young, I understood a bit of the dangers of the internet, but I still wasn't cautious enough. Because I skimmed through her profile pictures, thinking, surely if she had so many pictures of herself, of her life, then she must be a real person. And that was that. I was utterly and completely in love with a girl, a person that I only knew through a profile. She had messaged me out of the blue, said that she had attended the same elementary school back in the day, and that she thought I grew into a pretty good-looking guy. The compliment came at me fast, and I was wholly unprepared for it. I was thrilled, excited, taken aback. We chatted that night, flirting, catching up with each other, though I honestly didn't remember her from elementary school. Despite all that, I ignored it, believed everything Linda wrote to me in those messages, and craved her presence more and more. Having someone seemingly fall in love with you like that for the first time, during a time in your life when your mind and body are telling you that you need to find someone, her presence soon became an addiction. I was just too afraid to ask to see her in person. That was the next high that I wanted, the next step that I wanted to take with Linda. And luckily, or unluckily now that I know better, she asked me herself if I'd like to meet up with her, specifically at a park smack dab in the middle of where we each lived. It was perfect, and moments after she clicked enter to send that message, I'd replied with a resounding yes. We would meet on a Wednesday evening, and she said not to tell my parents. Both of these facts were warning signs. Meeting on a weekday during school hours and being secretive about it. She said she just didn't want her parents involved yet, as hers were overbearing about her dating life. So I skipped school, walked straight to the park we were to meet at after I got off the bus at school. It took me 2.5 hours to walk there, but I didn't care. My life was feeling complete, and I was racked with anxiety at the same time. Once I arrived, I waited at a bench and then texted Linda, letting her know that I was waiting on her. The first thing I realized about the park was that it wasn't much of a park. The place was run down, most of the equipment had rusted, it was broken, meaning that people that usually came to parks weren't there at all. Actually, I hadn't seen another soul since I arrived. This public place wasn't as public as I first thought. It was when she was late that my doubts began to set in, that maybe I was in over my head. And then it happened. I was sitting on the bench one second, then face down on the ground the next, with the ringing in my ears and the world around me vibrating. The back of my head felt like it had exploded, and I was so dizzy I couldn't stand for a moment. I turned to look behind me where I once sat at the bench. A bald man in a beat-up old leather jacket had what appeared to be some sort of nightstick in his hands, and he was beginning to circle around the other side of the bench, toward me. I had to get away. I summoned all the strength I had left, stumbling about through the grass. I fell down 2 more times, and the man came inches from me before I was able to break into a sprint. As the wind passed over my face, I could feel a liquid cooling on my skin around my neck and the back of my head. I knew I was bleeding. I ran to the bus stop, made sure there were other people around, before I lost consciousness. I woke up at the hospital with my mom practically screaming at me and the world still spinning. Apparently, this man had posed as a teenage girl, attempted to knock me out, and what he was planning to do after that, I don't know. I made it out before that happened. The doctor said I was lucky, that I didn't suffer brain damage, that I didn't pass away right there on the spot, or at the very least, slip into a coma. So this Valentine's Day, be aware of the people you haven't met. Meet in a place that is really public when you see them for the first time, and maybe bring a friend with you. You can never be too prepared. There are evil people in this world, and I almost became one of their victims. Valentine's Day is meant to be a fun time for you and your significant other. Enjoy that time together, but remember to stay safe and aware of your surroundings. No matter the time of year, there are always evil people looking for the next victim to meet their own sick desires. You don't want to be locked up in a basement, chained to a chair this Valentine's Day. Or do you sicko? Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send me your true scary stories today with the links in the description. Oh, and if you want to support this channel and maybe buy someone a cool Valentine's Day gift, check out my merch store at morbidmonsters.com. As always, thank you all for listening. Stay safe out there and stay creepy.